I'm going to borrow this mic until mine comes on. And first of all, why don't you join me in thanking Larry, and Sergey for welcoming us here on Google.
A round of applause.
As you know, Google has identified three very large problems: global poverty, global public health, and the climate crisis. And they are approaching these three problems with a strategy that combines innovation, policy advocacy, and investment. So it's a three-pronged strategy, and the use of capturing of information technology and search to educate the public. And I think that probably one could argue that the greatest strength comes from the capacity to harness the talents of Googlers, harness the tools of Google to inform and engage the world public. And I say that only because the issues we've identified and their solutions are going to be largely the aggregate effect of millions of individual choices, as well as the decisions that governments make. And so informing those choices will be all important. And so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the values that guide Google, that guide .org, as well as their views of how to conceptualize these issues and how to apply information technology and other means to addressing them. And I'm just hoping that this mic is now working. It is. Thank you, Sergey. Sergey, I'm going to open with you and just ask you about the genesis of do no evil. Is that the way to say it? It's do no evil?
Do no evil, don't be evil. A lot of people misinterpret that. They miss the implicit second-person subject. Because, of course it's not we're not evil, it's you don't be evil. We're speaking to the rest of the world.
And how are we doing?
Well, so to enforce this concept, we now have Larry, tell them about the laser. No, I'm joking. I know you were all worried. Don't Be Evil was originally written down, I believe, by our employee Amit Patel. And it was at the time when we first hired business people at Google. After about a dozen employees or so. And he was concerned. He was one of our early engineers. But it serves now as a reminder to all of our employees. That's actually the you, or the subject of the sentences. And to consider the consequences of their actions. But after a little while, we realized it was wrong. It was a mistake. And it should really say not don't be evil, but be good. Because, we can be very careful about the small consequences of everything we do and trying to make sure that, they're not evil. But ultimately, we're in a position where we do have a lot of resources, a lot of unique opportunities, and wouldn't be stepping even beyond that to say, well, not only should you not be evil, but you should really take advantage of the opportunity you have to do good. And that's basically the genesis of Google.org. And that's what we're trying to learn from all of you, how we can best achieve that goal.
However, if it was be good, she wouldn't be asking you about it.
Well, if your core mission, Larry Page, is to provide usable information, and you're translating that information into the languages of the developing world, what is the potential economic development impact? What is the impact in potentially combating poverty, simply in that core mission?
Well, I think one of the things we've been really excited about is automatic translation technology. And we have a team now that's doing translation of the best, for example, Arabic to English translation in the world that's done by machine, not by people. and you can use that now. And we think that those kind of things can have a really big impact, because for people, who only speak Arabic or something like that, their view of the world is quite different maybe than our view of the world. And having that translation can really help with that. And being able to search other information and get access to a wide variety of things. And I think that's true for very many of the places that are developing. I mean, they have very small amounts of information, very small amounts of books, and so on. And for them to get access to sort of all the information in the world, even if somewhat imperfectly translated, is still a huge, huge boon. And I think we can really start to do that.
The 2003, I think it was when the Arab Development Report was released, and one of the key findings was that Arabic-speaking world was truly isolated because of the lack of translations of scientific texts, of great classics, of a variety of works. Larry, brilliant. How important is this to reversing that trend?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that we have two Larrys here, because I know it makes it harder for you.
But it was kind of your parents to offer you two different last names.
That's right.
Just for tonight.
Also, at least one of them is smart.
There's nothing I could possibly say that wouldn't get me into trouble. So, well, I really don't know the answer to that question. I know that in the past few weeks, we've been fortunate to meet with a lot of the politicians from Rwanda, Tanzania, the presidents of both those countries. And Larry and I were just talking that it is remarkable that when you speak to them, the first thing they say is they want jobs. It isn't that they want more information. It's not that they want handouts. It's not that they want more foreign aid. They don't want model millennium villages. They don't want demonstration projects. They don't want foundation money. They want jobs. And that is a clear-cut message, I think, for all of us as we look through the world around us. And you just look at the trajectory of growth and the trajectory of change. And you can use words like democratization, but really what makes a country better is a more fair distribution of resources, a chance for people to get out of the cycle of poverty, and that translates into jobs.
Yeah, can I add something to that too? Actually, I was really amazed. I had this simple goal for Google. We have about 10,000 employees now, or more than that. And I said, well, it seems like we should have one in every country. And 10,000 people is a lot of people, and Google's available in over 100 languages, and we're used in every country in the world. Maybe it's a few exceptions, and where they don't have internet at all. But I think that's a pretty simple goal, and I set out to do it. And sort of 6 months later, our lawyers come back and they say, well, we can't actually do that because of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You're going to have huge risk to the company, even if you have one employee there, and so on. And I think after a year or so, people have worked really hard on it, and we've actually got people maybe in 20 or 30 weird countries, and those countries are expanding, and they've been tremendously useful. I mean, you can imagine a company with our footprint. Places, like Egypt or something like that, which might not be on the list of high-tech companies where they would have offices. There's a lot of people that use Google in Egypt, and, they want to talk to the press, wants to talk to us, and, things need to happen. And it was really a wake-up call for me about how hard it is for multinationals, which have been very successful in doing a lot of business in the world, to really do business in some places where you wouldn't normally go, Ghana, the Republic of Georgia, or places where we talk to the government there. And those places just simply don't have any jobs at all. And they would have a lot more jobs if it were easier for companies to go in. And there's no lack of smart people in a lot of these places. So that was, I just think, an interesting sort of structural issue I wasn't really aware of.
So in the end, policy matters and governance matters.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's bad that we're trying to reduce corruption. That's obviously a huge issue, but I think that that's had unintended consequences, and a lot of business people, aren't willing to take the risks that are necessary to operate in some of these places, and I think that's a loss for those places.
Yeah. We were actually talking at the dinner table about the way businesses have in fact contributed to transparency and coping with the corruption problem, in part because the extractive industries got together, Shell, BP, and others, and led an effort that involved posting publicly any transfer of funds to any government official, so that bribery couldn't happen, or if it did, it was known to the public. And so there's a very positive role that can be played if you're already there. And your problem is just getting there. Larry Brilliant, if you're talking about generating jobs, a big part of this 3 days is going to be focused on the whole question of building what's called the Smee sector, the small and medium enterprise sector. Everything from mom and pop stores to factories to larger businesses. How important is that as a strategy? And is this the kind of investment strategy that makes sense for philanthropically minded?
It's absolutely huge. We're doing a number of things. Some are small pilot projects, others are kind of learning initiatives, and some are big dreams, as you might imagine. Let me just ask the question. How many people here are working in Africa or India at all, if you'd raise your hands? Of those, how many are working in or interested in working in job creation? It's almost, I don't know if it's 80%, but it's a high percentage. And it's almost a synonym of economic development and economic job creation. I must say, we worked with Technoserve, and I think Bruce is here someplace. Are you here, Bruce? Yeah, Bruce is there in the back with Technoserve in Ghana, and with Rachel Payne, if Rachel's here, who did just a wonderful job. They created a business planning contest. And I was skeptical at first. I mean, there's so many business planning contests at Stanford, and we're all asked to come and judge them. And they become really a kind of an academic exercise, and nobody's going to take that plan and do anything with it other than maybe use it to get their next job. But in Ghana, it wasn't like that at all. What Bruce and his team did was they spent almost a year planning for it. They went to every corner of Ghana. They dealt with every religious community, every language community, every geographic area, especially with women. And in the end, I think it was 700 plans, business plans that they got, out of which they found 10 winners, 3 different categories. The top 3 category winners will be, at no surprise to anybody here, we're all women. And each of these entrepreneurs received a $25,000 prize, but on top of that, they received maybe $100,000 worth of mentoring and goods and services. The top winner is coming to Tanzania for the TED Global Award. This was an amazing event, and why I say it was a transformative event, because how can 10 $25,000 grants be transformative for a country? It can't be. But one of the investment bankers in Ghana, who had trained with Morgan Stanley in New York, came back to Ghana. He saw this emerging talent that was invisible to him before, and he started a bank, and he has put $2 million now into venture, only to be used for the people who participated or won that business planning contest. Now, I may have my facts wrong on that, but there's no, he said, I don't have my facts wrong on that. Thank you very much. So the net result was a weird idea of a business planning contest that was executed properly, evoked a feeling of hope in an entire country, and now there's capital chasing deals, which is what you want. Capital chasing deals is better for a country than deals chasing capital. And so it's a really great success. So that's one SME answer. I know Alan Patrickoff is here with a really great idea on SME fund, and there's a lot of people here who are thinking about it. Tim Worth is here. There's a great number of ideas in this space right now. And I really encourage people who are interested in it to find each other, talk about it, and compare notes, because it's one of the most important things we can do together as a community.
Actually, can I ask a question? How many people here have been to Africa? Okay, good.
That wouldn't happen in a typical meeting in America, by the way. That wouldn't happen in Congress.
But let me say what, in part, why I think Larry Page asked that question, because since you've been here, you've been using your vacation time. I love the concept that you have to, do you have to apply to Sergey for vacation time, and Sergey then applies to you? But in any case, you use your time off to go to the developing world, isn't that right?
Well, my long vacations, it takes a while to get there, so. Yeah, no, that's true. And I was asking, because I mean, I've been pretty amazed. I just went to Ghana recently, for example. And I saw one of the business plan winners, but I was pretty surprised at the level of development in some of these places. And for me, I ask people even before I go, some of our people who've been there, and I just can't get any idea of one of these places until I go.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't expect Ghana to have a really nice yellow pages. And I actually brought it back and I showed it to our business people, and they have this yellow pages just like ours, it's not such a weird place,
And are you going to be encouraging Googlers, because I know that you're encouraging Googlers to volunteer their time, are you going to be encouraging them to be traveling overseas as well and to have that kind of first-hand experience?
I'll take that. We're actually creating, and here you've heard the name, Google Core. We had the name before we heard it on stage today. And we've been working on a two-part plan. You know, Jane, very well, one part of it, which is an 18-month course, sort of a graduate school level course on economic development, global health, and climate change. And then for graduates of that course, the idea that they could go and...
I haven't graduated yet.
Is that good? And is Marty Krasny? Marty, raise your hand. Are you here? Marty Krasny's been working on that. There he is back there. So the idea is...
He didn't even lead the applause, I don't think.
I think he started it. He's really sneaky. But the idea is that people come to Google...
When were you going to tell us about this?
Applications are open. So the idea would be that people who get trained in economic development will make better volunteers, whether you're going to work with Wangari Maathai or you're going to work at the Aravind Eye Hospital. And obviously, the HR functions will have to be, you've been here for X amount of time, you get this amount of leave, you've got accumulated, whatever it's going to be. Because until people do what Larry's done and actually are face-to-face with the countries that they're interested in working in, until they really learn what the economic determinants are of these disparities, the first ideas that we suggest on how to eradicate malaria, how to stop poverty, how to start climate change, they're frequently not the right ideas. It takes a long time to deal deeply in these areas. And we're fortunate in Google that we have a group of employees and family members who deeply care about that. So yes, the answer is it's a big deal for us.
Sergey, your own experience in living in a country that experienced in recent years the rapid impoverishment of many after having a strong middle class, did that at all shape your concern about social change, about social benefit? How did it lead you to where you are today?
I think probably for my experience, it wasn't as much growing up in Russia as the coming to the United States and recognizing the tremendous opportunities that I had as a result of my parents and myself immigrating when I was 6 years old. I think seeing that, it makes me see how...
See, today we wouldn't have let him in the country.
Probably true.
Well, I might have won the visa lottery. I get those emails. If I just replied, that lawyer that emailed me assured me that. Anyhow, I think that I'd like to see everyone have that kinds of opportunities that I had. And we were very poor even when we came to the U.S. And yet the country makes it so accessible to try to do the best you can, to get through school, try to get an education, be entrepreneurial, and that just doesn't exist in other countries, and everybody has just the same capacity to develop and be successful. It's just that they don't have a chance.
When you think about the issues that you've identified as priority issues, all of them are responsive to science and technology kinds of solutions. Science and technology has got a huge role to play in all of them. How important is it that we provide a welcoming atmosphere, a welcoming environment for people from the brightest students from around the world to come to our universities to study science and math and engineering or other topics, and then bring those skills back home and lead their countries, build their economies, build businesses, or stay here and start companies here? How important is that to us and to your objectives?
I think it's increasingly less important to them, believe it or not, because I actually see a lot of those opportunities emerging in these other countries. In terms of the schools, the caliber of the employees and whatnot that we can hire in our India, China offices and whatnot, they're very, very talented people. And they've been now well educated, and they have entrepreneurship there, they have businesses. In a lot of these places, not all the world, the parts of the world I was referring to before, people don't have opportunity. But now there are a number of places outside the US where they do have opportunity. And really, I feel that we're shortchanging ourselves. It really hurts our companies when we can't hire the best and the brightest here, and we have to go abroad. And in fact, disproportionately, it hurts smaller companies because we now have offices in all these places, so we can hire them. But when we were just a few years ago, we couldn't, and we didn't have access to that fantastic talent, and it's just silly.
Larry, you were about to add something.
Oh, that's good.
At the graduate level, there's a huge opportunity in India with the IITs. At the graduate level, there are huge opportunities here. But Larry Page, do we give enough attention to science and math education at early ages, both here and in the developing world? And is that an area for investment?
Yeah. I think you must have seen my talk I gave recently. I gave a talk at AAS, the sort of scientific society, and I had sent it out to some people inside the company. It was basically about science and technology and how it really is it's sort of the main leverage point in the world. And we have this guy Hal Varian, who's a famous economist at Berkeley, and he'd seen the talk before I gave it, and he said, "Well, you need this one slide." And basically, the slide, it shows the GDP, or sorry, the sort of earning per capita, and it sort of bubbles around for a long time, and then it hits the Industrial Revolution, and it just goes straight up. And it keeps going, by the way. It doesn't stop. It's just still going straight up. And he said the only real explanation economists have for that is technology. It was mass production of things. It was, technology for farming and all those kind of things. It wasn't that we were suddenly so much smarter at that point in time, right? It's that we actually we developed technology, and it replicated, and we could do things without using as many people. And I feel like we've lost that intuition. It's not the case that stopped somehow, right? When we started Google, if we hadn't had computers that were as fast, we couldn't have built it. Computers somehow, they've been getting twice as fast every year, basically, for a long time. And then all of a sudden, you can have something like Google. You can search all the world's information, and it can be free, right? Or ad-supported. And, that's actually helps people's productivity and helps the world and so on. So I think somehow as a world, we've lost sight of that. People don't think about it that way. And there's still a huge opportunity there. And I figured I did some estimates on the number of people who graduate, for example, in the US. It's like a small percentage, like 3% or something, that really graduate in areas that have high leverage, areas where people develop technology that could really change the slope of that curve that's going up. And I figured if we, modestly multiplied it by 10 to say 30%, which wouldn't be that big a percentage, we'd probably have 10 times the rates of development that we have now of those technologies, which really do affect things. So I guess I'm very optimistic about this, because I see that, a few more people, and all of a sudden we could have much greater development than we have now. And I also think some of the things that people have been talking about here, like the global warming issues, I'm optimistic we can get 1 cent per kilowatt hour solar thermal. And I just look at that and go, well, if we can do that, we can replace all the coal-fired plants really quickly, and nobody really needs to do anything else. And somebody can do that in their garage, right? It's not impossible for a couple of really smart technology people to figure out how to do that. And I guess I'm very optimistic about these things. But I'd like to have many more people trying to do those things, trying to use technology to do things that are very impactful.
How important is it to have political leaders that are science literate?
Well, I guess in the talk I gave the example that, for example, the Prime Minister, President of India is a rocket scientist. And we actually met with him, and he asked us about the encodings, language encodings that we use on Google and all the different languages in India. It's not really what you expect, conversation you expect to have with, somebody who heads a country, right? It doesn't happen in most countries. And, you can argue about causality in India, but it's not an accident that they have, tremendous information technology and all this economic growth and all that. Maybe that caused him to be president. Maybe he caused that in some sense. So I think, I do think it's important. Taiwan has also had like an engineer leader for a while, which is also a very high technology place. So I think it's correlated. I don't know about the causation.
And China has often had in leadership positions electrical engineers, engineers in general. That's a...
Yeah, well, I guess engineers here are low status, so we don't.
You've moved us, though, into the investment, the sort of supply side of the energy problem, the question of alternative fuels. Where do you think, John Doerr has referred to this as the mother of all markets, and then I think he sort of thinks he ought to temper that a little bit, but I'm not so sure. Is this the mother of all markets, and where are the real opportunities?
I wanted to give a quick stat. Steve Chu, the Nobel Prize winner, has this great stat that I think Americans have about 1,000 energy helpers. So if you take the number of calories you just ate for dinner and multiply it, by your other meals, you take a couple thousand calories a day, and then you take the energy use of the U.S. and divide it by all the people. There's 1,000 people helping you. So there's 1,000 people pushing your car, and, pumping the water in your toilet, and all those things. Those things like water we take for granted. Transporting this water bottle on a truck and all that. 1,000 people for each one of you, and that's a lot of people. China, I guess, has about 100 people per person. So they have a significant amount of energy. I'm sure the developing countries have much, much less than that. And so we kind of take that for granted, but there's a huge amount of energy that's used for good purposes. I mean, it's great to have clean water and flushing toilets and all these things we take for granted. But, I think that I would turn this stuff around and say, if we can make energy cheaper, like, say, using solar technology, everybody in the world can have 10,000 energy helpers. And, won't have that much effect on the world, and we'll all be pretty happy. We'll be happier than we are now, hopefully.
And are you attracted, Sergey, to wind, to solar? Are there more revolutionary technologies that you think are around the bend?
I think in the near term that wind is a really good bet because it's already cost competitive. And certainly longer term, solar, and also, of course, on the transportation side, the fuels, the ethanols. And I know these are very conventional answers, but I think that people are overly conservative when they estimate where these are going to end up. And it's easy to see the costs and whatnot today, which are, by the way, are already in many places competitive. But just extrapolating some of these curves 10 years down the road, and of course somebody has to do the work, by the way, and hopefully accelerate it beyond the present rate of cost decline. But I think we could see really cheap, clean energy in the not too distant future.
And I should note that Google has made a very large solar commitment in terms of your own facilities. You ought to say a word about that.
I wouldn't call it very large. It's sort of large by corporate campus scales, but
we claim it's large, but it's not really.
It's not large on a global scale. It's not. I guess it is visible from space, but.
So are many things.
But so are many things, assuming you have a good enough lens. Anyhow, we have about a third of our campus power usage that we're going to run on solar, and much of it has already been installed. And, the remainder, I don't know if any of you had challenges with parking. That's because we're finishing off the solar carports and whatnot. And it was interesting. It's just not all that expensive. It's somewhat more expensive, but not by a lot. And in fact, the companies that we're working with, they all have, and others that we talk to, they have better products coming down the pipe. So next year we'll be able to get cheaper, more efficient, and the year after that, better still. And we're looking at other areas to deploy.
It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. People get confused about this, but there's a cost curve for solar, and it's been, changing for a long, long time, and it's relatively predictable. I think we have about a 7-year payback, but we have some subsidies in place. But that'll pretty soon, that'll be a 7-year payback with no subsidy. And in that case, you'd be stupid not to do it if you own the building, right? So I don't think it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Yeah, most of the cost, I should add, today is not the solar panels. It's, the installation, you have to get permits, and you have to have, there's the union labor that installs it, and there are a whole bunch of hurdles. And I think that those can be, over time, as it becomes much more regular thing to just cover your roof with solar and whatnot, all those things become more efficient too.
Actually, one other point I want to make about wind was that there's some pretty amazing studies that show if you had a good electricity grid, wind would be hugely cost competitive now. So there's a study that says, for example, you could generate 80% of your total electricity use in Europe if you simply had an electric grid that connected northern Africa, say Egypt, all the way to Scandinavia. And that's actually technically a feasible thing to do. Now, my guess is on our current path, it will take us, 30 years to do that because all the governments have to talk to each other. But it might be a good project for some of the people in the room to try to really figure out if that's worthwhile. Wind costs about 3 cents a kilowatt hour now, which is the same as coal. The catch is it's not windy all the time. And so the real cost of wind is about 9 cents a kilowatt hour, and because it's, of this variability. But you get to take out all of that variability for 80% of your total power if you just interconnect those areas, because it's always windy somewhere. And you can make up your 20% in many reasonable ways using peak power generators. So that would get rid of your, that would be much cheaper than the way they produce it now, and it would be, I think a very good thing to do. But I think some of these things are going to take large-scale coordination and some good engineering and technology, people thinking about how to do it.
Now, as you think about investments as a strategy in order to, not just to make money, but as a strategy for social change, what is your sweet spot? Are you looking for the sort of game-changing kind of investments that are high enough risk so that they would not, they would not attract traditional equity, they wouldn't attract venture capital, they wouldn't attract project finance? Are you willing to lose money on this?
I don't think it's that issue so much. I think there's a lot of money. We've been doing some small investments, but there's a lot of money available for these things. The issue is there's very few people who are doing them. I get interested in this thing. I don't know, we could figure out how many people are really working on improving the electric grid in Europe, but I'm sure it's a small number, right, who are thinking about it strategically. And, it makes sense for somebody to fund somebody to do that. And there's plenty of money available to do it. It's just that there aren't people doing those things. And I think in any of these areas, if you look at novel kinds of solar or whatever, there's a lot of money available, but very, very few people.
What about on the demand side of the equation, the whole question of conservation technologies? Is that an area where you think that markets will push the process? And just the fact that the cost of energy as it currently exists.
My personal opinion is that conservation is poorly marketed. In a sense, consider light bulbs. So you can take out a 100-watt incandescent light bulb in your house and replace it with like a 20-watt compact fluorescent. And in the old days, it would be kind of a little bit too high temperature. It'll look blue, and it would, maybe not turn on quickly. And now they're better and whatnot, but it's still. They probably overmarket a little bit. Really, it'll be more like 80 or 90 watt incandescent. But I feel it's the wrong approach. You should tell a person to get a 50 watt compact fluorescent, take out their 100 watt incandescent, and then they'll get a much brighter bulb that also will save half the energy.
Actually, Sergey's been ordering these, and they're ridiculously bright. Like I put one in, and it like blinded me.
Yeah. I've been buying. They're actually hard to get. Like the normal hardware store doesn't tend to carry them, but they look really bright. I like having a lot of light, and they're still less power than the conventional ones. But I think you need to use. I mean, I don't think people. People like to do charitable things good for the world, kind of because it feels rewarding and whatnot. But there's sort of a limit to how rewarding. Oh, I just saved 3 watts for the world. Like it's just like not that exciting.
Although, I mean, it's so wonderful for me having great engineers to talk to because they really deeply understand this stuff. But I heard Ira Magaziner here this morning, and I thought he did a really good job. And what he was saying was that there are places that 35% of all the energy is just wasted. That is the definition of low-hanging fruit. And I heard Amory Lovin say, and it's just a compelling image, he says, half of the wealth that China is creating is running out of its single-pane glass windows every day. And I think those are compelling images that need to be looked at as low-hanging fruit.
I definitely agree with that, but I do think it causes a marketing problem. I mean, I think we should do all the conservation things, but I also think that if you had 1 cent per kilowatt hour, solar energy, you'd have lots of, swimming pools with no covers everywhere, and you wouldn't care that much.
Yeah, I think it's both and rather than either or, and it's a timing issue too, because there are some things that you can do right now, and it feels kind of profligate, not to do right now. And so we try to invest, I think, simultaneously in both of those. We've recently had Dan Reicher join us, who was Assistant Secretary of Energy in the Clinton administration, one of our Clintonistas on board. And he's been doing a lot of testimony at the Senate, talking a lot about conservation. But at the same time, we're trying to run an investment portfolio doing exactly what Larry and Sergey is talking about. So I don't find a contradiction.
By the way, I think all the nuclear plants in the U.S. were the energy saved by the Energy Star refrigerator policies was roughly equal to that. Or actually, I think it was substantially more for the refrigerators. The energy we saved by just doing a minor change to the refrigerators, which had almost no manufacturing cost change.
Right.
Sorry, were you about to say?
I would throw out another example. Just if you look at the single pane windows issue or whatnot, I think you can give people a more clear benefit. Like here at the office, and we should really fix this. But if I get up in the morning and it's nice and hot out, like let's say it's 75 or 80 degrees out, and I bike to work pretty often, but because of, it's good exercise and whatnot. Thank you. I mean, I care. I'm trying to avoid emitting fuels, but realistically, I probably care more about my health, just as a practical matter, rather than the tiny amount of gas it takes me to drive. But, I put on something commensurate with the weather. So, maybe it'll be a T-shirt if it's hot out. And then I get here to the office, and I'm freezing because it's a constant temperature that they keep, or they try, probably about 70 degrees or so. It's very uncomfortable, and then I have to find something to put on. And
usually it doesn't bother.
And then later at night, like if it's cold outside and you walk out and you're all kind of reasonably dressed inside, but it's freezing outside, you're just mismatched. So instead, what you could do is you should let the temperature in the building fluctuate a bit. And when it's hot out, you make it a little bit hotter, and when it's cold out, you make it a little cooler. I think people will be more comfortable that way because it's irritating to have the sudden change when you go in and out anyway. But you don't have to, I don't think you have to phrase it as a savings for the environment. You just should say it's more comfortable if you're on closer to the outside.
That's what we'll tell our employees, Sergey.
I should point out that this is what he's talking about is changing from a T-shirt to a long sleeve T-shirt and then back to a T-shirt again. So
you forget there are people who don't live in California, Sergey.
They put on ties during dinner just out of respect for the Pangea folks from the International Finance Corporation who brought those ties to us from Cambodia. But I could not persuade them to wear ties all the way up to stage. That was too long for these two guys to be wearing ties. Let me go back, Larry Brilliant, to your point. You noted that Dan Reicher was testifying on the Hill. With regard to energy policy, and there is some movement on energy policy on Capitol Hill with Jeff Bingaman and chairing the committee in the Senate. How important is it for the philanthropic community to be playing a significant policy role in trying to shape the policy environment in which these decisions are taken?
I love these rhetorical questions. I mean, how could anything be more important in a way? I mean, I don't know how many of you worked on AB 32. Let's take a state issue. First of all, I think Google's really proud of the fact that we supported and lobbied for AB 32. And there was a moment in time when, if it hadn't been for the support of the companies and support of industry...
Wait, what is AB 32?
It's a shirt size.
You actually should describe the legislation for those not
It's a California legislation that requires the state of California to meet global warming gas emission standards. And it has become a catalyst, like rolling thunder all over the country. There are now 7 other states that are using model legislation like that. And in fact, part of the testimony that Dan was doing at the federal level was to see if there were ways that this piece of legislation could become part of federal legislation. And it was a near thing. It was 1 or 2 votes from not being passed. And there are people in the room here with phone calls and with friends and with support that could influence 1 or 2 votes on almost any issue like that. So it's really critically important, because sometimes I think people, it's like not going to vote in an election. You think your vote doesn't matter. Here is clearly a vote with fewer voters, and it matters a lot more. So I think it's terrifically important. And on different issues, it matters even more. We have a moment in time now where I think that the state and federal legislation is favorably disposed to making changes that will help our kids and our grandchildren live in a better world as far as climate change. We should not take it for granted that we're always going to have that favorable climate. Things change very quickly. We should act now.
And how important was it to, is this a large reason for the decision to make .org activities be largely treated as not tax-exempt activities? Was this so that you could be more active in the policy sphere?
I mean, basically it's because of all of you. Or many of you that we spoke to in the process of setting up .org, and even prior to that. And many of the organizations that we met with that had regretted perhaps their choice of structure and whatnot. You know, a lot of organizations felt like they'd rather have more flexibility. And we were pretty far down the path. In fact, we did create Google Foundation, which is a 501c3, but that's now just a portion of Google.org. And we just found a lot of the peers who were present here and elsewhere who really told us, gave us really, I think, great advice before we finalized setting things up, that we want the flexibility. And we've been enjoying it because we can do things like that.
We should say, too, we're pretty profitable, so the tax difference is not as significant for us either.
I wanted to just turn to, because we began by a conversation about how you leverage information technology, how you leverage search in order to engage the public, educate the public, put them in a position to be taking smart decisions that they want to take. Say something about the conscious application of search in the case of Google Earth. Larry? Brilliant.
Of Google Earth, or of, is this our ending swan song?
Actually, before we do that, no, because I want to ask you about instead also. So
Oh, okay. Because we have a treat for the ending question. I just needed to be queued up and know which one that is. So this is not that question.
This is not that
Okay.
question.
So remind me when we get to that question. So you're talking about instead now?
Oh, he doesn't want it to be that question. Okay, let me just say that instead, what we're doing is now we're shifting to the topic of public health and the ways in which you can use information technology for early detection and response. So tell us about instead.
So Bill Fagey, who's in the audience hiding, was my mentor in the smallpox eradication program, and he created a novel way of dealing with disease control programs, and in this case eradication, which was to find every single case of smallpox on the planet Earth at the same moment in time and then respond to it by putting vaccinating people or quarantining them, and put a circle of immunity around every case. So search, surveillance, and then containment, which led to eradication of smallpox, and is a similar strategy to that which is being used by the Carter Center in guinea worm and is being used by WHO in polio eradication. And when I watched what happened with SARS, with that background in mind of find every case and then respond to it, as opposed to try to vaccinate everybody in the world. In the case of smallpox, if there was an epidemic of smallpox in Tokyo, God forbid, it would not help to vaccinate in New York. You have to put your vaccine where the disease is. So in the case of SARS, it took us an awful long time for there to be a recognition of a novel communicable disease, a coronavirus in this case, a virus which happens to have its real home in bats. It then got to civet cats, and then people ate those civet cats. So it seemed like a really long time, and it gets very disquieting when it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 epidemiological generations to find the disease which grows logarithmically. It's a good thing to get there quickly. And
Exponentially.
Exponentially, that's what I said, exponentially. So good. You should come to our board meetings. It's just terrible. I said exponentially. It's on the tape. So what we watched with SARS was it took almost 9 months for the government of China to announce that it had a case of SARS. But there was a web crawler in Ottawa that had detected SARS 6 months earlier than the Chinese government had actually announced it. And that was because they were trolling a very small number of websites, 20,000 it turned out, in a very small number of languages. And they found all this chatter about this new disease. And anyway, it's a long story. This same website called GFIN was able to locate bird flu in humans in Iran 6 months before the government of Iran notified it. So that led to the idea that the tremendous investment that Google has made in search technology could be used for finding novel diseases and, in fact, pandemics or almost pandemics or new epidemics or even any other kind of a imminent disaster earlier than before, and then use the other technology that Google has, Google Earth, to visualize the disaster area, to be able to use some of the tools for collaboration and communication to do an almost event management system. So we've been doing that and working really hard with a group, a nonprofit that we started, and Judy Roden is a co-funder of that from Rockefeller, and many of the other people here in this room have been tremendously supportive of that. We have about 30 disaster response organizations that are working on that or are partners in that, and half a dozen or 8 different technology organizations working on it. And our hope is to take this technology and all the technology, I guess, that Silicon Valley has produced, put it together and make it as a gift to the disaster response community so that we can deal better with disasters.
I should note that Tim Wirth, when he was Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, led an interagency process to try to develop an emergency surveillance and response network, much like this. This has been something that's been on the minds of political leaders for a long time, and it's a question of capturing what the private sector has to offer here. But what's interesting about this problem is it's a kind of a focus on the user and the rest will follow problem, and that is that those who know about the disease will sometimes not be a doctor or someone in a local clinic. It may be a school teacher who sees the patient present, the student present. It may be a ship's captain. It may be the pilot on an airline, because the disease may manifest itself after the person has boarded. So this is an opportunity to feed up information.
Well, what's happening as a result of all of these community-based information services, Google's one, eBay's another, there's a lot out there now, is that it is becoming much more reliable and much more almost expected that citizens will have the ability to report things they see. You all do it. You're driving on the highway, you see an accident. The first thing you do is you reach for your phone, you call 911, and you say, hey, I don't mean to bother you, but I just saw this. It's almost becoming a reflex now. 20 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So what we've seen, I think, is a change in the way that the official reporting networks view what used to be unofficial information. Before SARS, 100% of all of the disease reports that reached the United Nations World Health Organization came from governments. That was the law. There are 193 governments that are members of WHO. The same thing's true for all the other UN agencies, where the information that they received about a disaster had to come from a government. When this GFIN was able to detect SARS and then bird flu earlier, and it reached a point that 70% of all of the outbreak information that was reaching WHO came not from the governments, but came from individuals that were reporting through these trolling services. So that led WHO, for one, to change the World Health regulations. So the beginning in June, for the first time legally, WHO will now be allowed to receive information about new outbreaks, potential pandemics, and other catastrophes from individuals. So the technology is changing the way in which the traditional system works. And I think that's an amazing, almost bottom-up revolutionary change in the way we process information.
But they had to change a law to do that?
They had to change the law to do that. They actually had to change the World Health regulations, which are codified every May when all the health ministers of the countries that, for all intents and purposes, are the shareholders and the board members of WHO.
Okay, let's hope that we don't get an outbreak that takes less than a year.
But, so as long as we wait until June, we'll be fine.
Let me, because you're ready to deal with your last question. Before you do that, I want to ask Larry and Sergey about Google Earth and about what you think its impact is. First, describe it really quickly. I think most people in this room know about Google Earth, but
who hasn't used Google Earth?
One person has not used Google. 2 people have not used Google Earth.
Get their names.
But what's interesting is how it can be used for environmental purposes, right? To understand the environmental impact of actions. Are we tracking that? Do we have a sense of how it's being used?
Well, Google Earth can be used for environmental issues, for social, political. It's just incredible, and that's why I fell in love with it prior to Google buying it. It was Keyhole before, and they had that was the company. It was called Earth Viewer, but it's just incredible how much more information you can get. Now, don't forget there have been satellites and things imaging the Earth for a long time, and airplanes and whatnot. The problem is that that imagery wasn't connected to all the people who could make use of it. And that's where you have a tremendous inefficiency, because you have all this tremendous, incredible amount of, oh, that's me. I was hoping Google Earth was back there. Anyhow, you have a tremendous amount of information, much more information than that. But you have to sign up. Before you had to, contact this agency, and it cost you like $100 to get one of you, or it was very expensive. And so it was maybe large companies and government agencies would occasionally do it. and it would be really a waste. And now so many people can use it for so many different things, and whether it's a humanitarian crisis, like the earthquake that we had near India and Pakistan a little while back, or Katrina, or any number of things, environmental issues, people use it to buy real estate, which actually, and you need to consider those aspects too. I mean, if you can now look at other parts of the world and anybody can look at them, does that now help create a better market for, say, that real estate, or for the vacations there, or for any number of things? I think unlocking that information, I was very excited that the Keyhole folks did that, and we acquired them and helped fund them to do that even more broadly.
And I just wanted to ask you too, before Larry gets to talk about his dreams for .org. In the beginning, you said you hoped that its impact would ultimately eclipse Google itself. Now, Google itself keeps raising the bar, making it hard to eclipse Google itself. But do you see that day?
Yeah, I think so. Today, almost all of our products, not quite all, but a vast majority, only touch people who have internet access. And we have a number of things that work over SMS and mobile, and so that touches somewhat broader community, but it's a reduced functionality. But unless we're, and by the way, it's not just Google.org. Unless Google.org, together with all of you, can really make internet access, information access universal, our products aren't really going to be able to touch those people that effectively. And that's why it's so important, and I'm very optimistic about it.
I was going to say, I think it's really daunting to be in this room, because sort of by definition, all of you have been working, for a long time, longer than us probably mostly, on sort of intractable problems. They're by definition the intractable problems because they're the really important ones that haven't been solved yet, right? And they're important enough that they would have been solved if it was easy to solve them. And so, I don't know, I'm a little bit daunted by that. I think the good thing about what we're trying to do is that at least we'll be, I guess, in the small room we have here, we'll be a part of that group that's trying to do things that could be impactful. And I think that, once your goal is to be very impactful, like I mentioned with the solar, there just aren't that many people doing that. So if your goal is really to change the world, you've already, you don't have that much competition in that. And so I think in that way I'm very hopeful, but I'm also, I guess, realistic, that these things are very, very difficult problems that this community has all worked on. And it can be, I think it could take a long time to make traction, but maybe over a long period of time we could do something really significant.
Larry. When you got the TED Prize, you were given a wish to change the world. Is your wish being fulfilled?
In India, they have several different tenses that we don't have. In Hindi, my favorite tense is not the past present, it's not the future perfect, it's not the present, it's the continuous present. So in India, if you ask somebody if your tea or your food is ready, they will always say, just now coming. I guess I feel that way about my wish, which is that at one level, because I'm a geek at heart, I'm like a kid in a candy store here. And I've got some phenomenal people to work with. So I have all these tools that I never dreamed that I'd be able to use for the TED Wish. It's a very different kind of place, and this is a very different kind of product. It's very difficult, as Google likes to launch early and often. And as Larry was saying, when you're dealing with some of these humanitarian issues, you can't really launch early and often. It's a different process. So I think the convergence of these complicated, intractable problems with the minds and the energy and the tools at Google has given me a chance to see far beyond my original wish. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
I'm going to ask you to show us one of the tools, because we have, for the last day and for 2 days ahead, been focused heavily on market solutions to these large problems. But in fact, some of the problems we face are not responsive to market solutions, problems such as the genocide in Darfur. And I wanted you to just show us how Google Earth is used to advance understanding of that issue in particular. And then let us close for the night.
Let me invite Megan to come up and tell you, Megan Goddard, who's from Google Earth. And some of you have seen on the news recently a Google Earth product that's been using to help visualize Darfur and the tragedy there. And I think under the overall guideline, which is that bad things happen in places that have no light and in the middle of the night in dark places, and the more light you can shine on something, the more antiseptic it is. Megan, can you tell them what you've been doing? She's going to tell the whole story.
I'm just waiting for this to come up. There we go. My name is Megan Goddard, and I am a member of the Google Earth team. And I had the honor of working with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. We've been working with them for about 1.5 years, and it was actually a 20% project from Andrea McCool. So we've been working with them to try to describe what's going on in Darfur. So here you see United States. I'm going to go through, show you exactly where you are. How many people have actually used Google Earth? I'm going to flip the question here. Okay, good. Now keep your hands raised. How many people have used Google Earth for more than going to your own house? Okay, good. So we have some people who have used it for more. Most of the time, the hands are still raised. So here we are at Google. These layers were released yesterday. And actually, I'm a little bit jet-lagged right now because I was at a press conference yesterday in Washington, D.C. for this. And I'm going to zoom you over here. Has anybody seen this yet? People? So the nice thing about, the great thing about this is that these layers are considered to be on by default. So if a person is flying around Earth, they'll see this and wonder what this is and want to look at it. So this is a very big impact. So I'm going to step you through this, and this is pretty much going to tell its own story. So you see here is the Darfur region. A lot of people, before this project was released, I asked a lot of friends and family, do you know about Darfur? Some of them had heard about it, some of them not. A lot of people really don't know where Sudan is. So number one, this is showing everybody where this is. I'm going to zoom in here. And what you see is a collection of icons. We worked with the museum to pick out a selection, sort of a preview set, to get people's attention so that they will go and explore it more. So I'm going to step you through this. So you start off here with this icon, and this is an actual photo of 2 people in a refugee camp in Chad. When you click on this, this was a design from the museum. They give you an introduction so that people can read about what they're looking at. Then you see this collection of icons here. The orange ones represent damaged villages, and the red ones represent villages that have been completely destroyed. This data was collected from the US government, and there's 1,600 points. So this, in combination with high-resolution imagery, will really start to tell a story. So I'm going to take you to one of the villages. This was a village. There was no name available. It used to have 870 structures, and it's considered destroyed. It's kind of hard to tell what this is. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. Each one of these circles represents somebody's house. This is a mud and grass hut. So when you start zooming around, you can see all these different icons and how many of them are. And to me, this really makes a very big impact on me to really see the devastation. The other thing that's included in this are a collection of photos. And I have to say, nothing tells a story like a photo or a picture. So here's a picture of a girl collecting wood outside of a refugee camp. A lot of people are attacked outside of these camps. Each one of these pop-ups includes a little link here where you can download additional information. So if you click on this, you get another layer here that gives you even more information. So I'm going to turn this on. We have a legend here. This shows testimonies from Amnesty International, more photos, videos. It shows all the refugee camps, which are these different colored blue icons. The light blue are in Chad, and the dark blue are within Darfur. This layer is actually directly downloaded from the Holocaust Museum's website. So we're hoping that people see this and they want to take action. So if you want to learn more about it, we have this link here. This brings you to a website that describes the project, where you can download more information, and more importantly, what you can do to take action. There's also a link here that says Learn More. When you click on this, there's also a link here called How Can I Help? When you click on this, it brings you to a website called What Can I Do? This was all, again, developed by the museum. And it gives you a list of action items that anybody can go and do. I want to emphasize that this was all information that was curated by the museum. They worked with many different organizations, photographers such as Mia Farrow, the US State Department to get the locations of the maps. So this is a collaboration from many different places. And we were fortunate enough to be able to help them, to be able to put this in so that people see it when they're flying around learning about our Earth. So to me, this is how we can leverage information and technology to promote awareness and inspire action for social change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan.
I think the lesson of this gathering is often that we have the conscience, we have the values, we have the resources. Sometimes all we need is simple access to information so that we can act collectively for the public good. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.